Today we're talking about the relationship. We're doing a series from now until Father's Day on relationships. And the relationship we're talking about today is actually the child. And the child relationship we're going to talk about mostly is the child within you, not so much a child external. But you know, it's in some ways it's very much the same. You know, the way you would treat a child outside could be the way that you treat your child inside. So a child needs respect, it needs tenderness and kindness and attention. It needs to be told that it's okay and it will be protected. It needs a chance to explore and be adventurous. It needs a place that's safe to come back to. These are things that children need. And when we are being good parents, we're supplying that mix, that salad of opportunity, responsibility, outcomes, instruction, etc. It takes a lot to raise a child. As everyone knows, it takes grandparents to raise a child. It's just too much for any one parent to do that. But this whole idea that it takes so much to raise a child means that many of us went through life as children with less than the optimal amount of something. And so we went through life doing the very best we could, and mostly the people around us were doing the very best they could. And yet there are things that would show up as things that are missing in our life, even though the whole intent was good, the effort was strong and ongoing, yet because it takes so much to raise a completely dependent being, so dependent, that if you walked away from a baby, the baby would die. There's no story of a baby getting up and walking and going getting a sandwich. It doesn't happen. They can't take care of themselves, and they are so dependent. We as human beings versus let's say a horse who gets up and runs in the first few minutes of life, we stay dependent for years. And it causes us to have a very complex child inside us. That child doesn't really die as you become a teenager or an adult. That child is still there. It's active inside us. It works through us, as us. It wants to talk to us. It wants to tell us stuff. It wants to be noticed. It wants the things that a child wants. And many times we ignore it. And of course we ignore it. You can't live your life as a child completely. You have duties, responsibilities. As you become a teenager, if you acted like a child, your peers would mock you, right? And as an adult, they would distance themselves. So we have this being inside us that basically is ours to take care of and not theirs. Now this is a trick for you to take care of your child. This is a real trick because basically we have done our best to ignore we have it, and now we're asked to take care of it at the same time. To live as though we're not a child and yet to take care of the child within us. Have you noticed that's rather double standard, right? We're supposed to take care of the child, not other people. But many of us, because we do a pretty crummy job of taking care of our child, we ask for other people to take care of our child. In very subtle and sometimes bad ways, right? So I want to talk a little bit about the general structure of the human psyche according to the great psychologist Carl Jung. Carl Jung, a psychologist in the 20th century in Switzerland, a student of Freud's, one of the founding fathers of psychotherapy today, had this, among other things, coined phrases like the collective unconscious and archetypes. And archetypes are grooves in the collective conscience, the collective psyche of humanity, that says in Africa, Asia, North and South America, Europe, we all have the similar grooves in our field of psyche. These grooves are archetypes. They are patterns that we can get on, and these patterns kind of carry us. We expend our energy in these patterns doing what you would do in that pattern. That's an archetype. And so it might sound like a really strange thing, an archetype, something overwhelming, and it is bigger than we are individually. It definitely is bigger than we are. The pattern has been there for umpteen tens of thousands of years, and there have been billions of people playing out parts of this, and so that the collective soup, which is our psyche, our collective psyche, that soup has these patterns in it, and when you fall into one, then it's a little more difficult to get out of it than if it had never happened before. It's like ruts in the road or a field that was plowed. If you get going down that row, you're going to tend to stay in it. And the interesting thing about an archetype is it kind of has a positive and a negative aspect to it. It has a good side and a bad side. The good side helps you, and the bad side, you're less functional in life. And so you can have a child archetype, a child groove, as they would describe it, a child archetype, and the child would have some good sides, some bad sides. You can have in the adult world, we have several options, and many of us are working several of these grooves at once. The analogy is only so good, so trust me, you can be in more than one groove at a time, and so you can be working these grooves, and basically for most people, they're quite unconscious, they just think that's the way I am. But it's a pattern that has come down to us through the millennia. Now, I do weddings seldom, but when I do a wedding, I typically tell people that they are about to enter into an archetype that will shift their relationship from being a couple not married to a couple married. And they're going to do this by having a ritual in which they declare their intention to be a married couple in front of people. And the combination of the of people being there to witness and the declaration of intention typically, I believe, shifts people over from single to married. And when you shift from single to married, you're now in a new groove. And that new groove has some quirks to it. And those of you who have been married go, who the heck is this guy? He's not what I was dating. That's what's happened, in my opinion. That's what happened. You slipped into another groove and you're going. One of those grooves is, oh, this is permanent, which I remember when I got married. The thing about the toilet paper going this way or that way, that was important now because it was for the rest of my life, right? It's a long time to be upset about something. So, right, so there is this thing which is called archetypes, and because human beings use archetypes to tell us how to live our life, it's good to be aware that you might be in one, right? And that awareness can give you a little bit of freedom inside that groove, and maybe you'll even change grooves. But if you don't know it's happening, there's a really good chance you'll just go, that's the way I am. Does that make sense? And that's the way I am is not a very good way of living life. It makes good music, you know. One of my favorite songs right now is by Lyle Lovett, and it goes like this: if I was the man she wanted, I'd not be the man that I am. But maybe if you want to be successful in more ways than one, you might want to shift your ability to go from one groove to the next, or even to float above them, if possible, and to choose when to be what and what. So that's kind of the background idea about the child that I want to talk to you, and about all the relationships that we're going to be dealing with, because, you know, there's the child, and there's the mother, and there's the father archetypes, there's wife, husband, yada yada, hero, victim, saboteur. Let's see, I've lost my train of thought, but you know where I'm going with this. There's quite a few. And the child, we'll start with the divine child. And this is you'll know this is an archetype because it shows up in cultures around the world. And the culture that we know best, the one that we know best in this culture is Jesus, the baby Jesus. Or as Ricky Bobby would say, 4-pound, 8-ounce baby Jesus. Do you remember that in Talladega Nights? Well, if y'all don't, it's not important. But that's who Ricky Bobby would pray to, little baby Jesus. Because the baby Jesus, the divine child, has two aspects to it. One, it is the potential of healing, transformation, renewal, redemption, salvation, etc. It is the potential of that, and it is helplessness at the same time. And that's how we're all born. And you know, if you come into a mother holding her baby for the first time, she's in full compliance with that. She's seeing the world in this baby, and yet at the same time the baby is completely dependent on her. And this is how we start life, in that state. As a divine child, we have so much potential and we have so much need at the same time. We're redeeming and we're dependent. And so you could see that if that aspect is with you the whole time, and it's kind of like the basis of humanity. That's how we start, with enormous potential and enormous dependency. What is the outcome that happens when you're both of those? Right? Some quirky things can happen. You can grow up and start to manifest the Savior, the potential aspect. But you can also grow up being overly dependent on other people, or on their opinion, or in any form of dependency and need with them. You become so you can see that the victim archetype could actually kind of grow out of this because you were dependent and it didn't happen, right? And so now you live with dependency. The dependency that's never satisfied, right? And you don't want to end there, do you? I mean, some people do. Some people make a career out of it. You know, they're always at the effect of other people, other events, other aspects of their life, and they cannot seem to break that. They're in that groove, and they are owning it as though it were nothing of their fault. They have nothing to do with it. It's just the way it is. Victim. And when we meet them, if we're not careful, we'll be sucked into either agreeing with them or hating them, one or the other. Right? We hate you for asking us to do stuff, or we agree with you, yes, you are completely innocent and helpless. The other side, we can grow into, let's say we begin to take on the qualities of the precocious child. And this precocious child is really good at it. And they start to learn stuff, and they become adept at sports or math or music or just outright charming people. They're precocious. And they develop that skill, and that skill can get blocked and cannot go any higher than, say, a precocious child, which is a charming, interesting person, but is not quite mature in the whole aspect of it. Now, when you mature in that, one of the ways that some of the psychologists call that is the magician. You become a magician. You can do things. You have manifested the ability to make things happen. Of course, there's a dark side to that. You can be a manipulator, you can be a trickster, you can be a bully almost in that category, right? But if you mature cleanly, neatly, that too much of your need to be satisfied over here has been satisfied. That you can move now into this state in which you were a magician and things happen around you. And you know people like that. I know some people that basically everything they touch turns to gold. Or if it doesn't turn to gold, it's just on its way to turning to gold. Right? You know those people? How many of you claim to be that? You don't have to raise your hand. But it's fun to be around those people because they can do things. I mean, they're precocious. They're amazing. Now, I don't know people. I was listening to some lecture some guy was going. He says, I talk to people, and many of them are not satisfied with their lives, and that's because of comparison. They go, I was talking to this guy, and he says, he was a pretty successful guy. He says, but I just don't feel like I'm that successful. My roommate has just done so much better than I have, and I think about it all the time, how I'm just kind of a failure. And the guy goes, who's your roommate? Elon Musk. Of course. But you can see, here's a guy who's learned how to use his wiles and to do a lot of things. He matured into the magician aspect. And later on, as you're going through life, you may, as you're maturing as a child, you may come up with this idea of being the hero or something like that. Someone who is actually out there protecting or creating or making something happen in a heroic way. And Joseph Campbell has written a ton about the hero's journey, in which the hero's journey basically has to leave home, leave what is known, go into the area beyond the boundary of whatever is known, face enormous difficulty, risk life and death, succeed, and then bring back the boon of whatever that was. Bring back what they learned. And that is what heals society. That's what transforms society. What the hero has done on his or her journey and has come back to now give something to society. And this growth into the hero, if you've met people who are committed to the hero, and that's as far as they've gone, they're kind of fun to be with, I'll say, because you're going to have some adventures with these people. They're going to go do something that's wild and fun and everything. But the lack of maturity in that shows up in their inability to bring the world in with them. When you begin to mature out of the hero, you move into a regal position, a queen or a king. And you can draw on others' energies and capacities and all of that. So they come with you on the journey and you make them better. It's not all about you doing something. You have now made the conditions in which the society or your friendship or your business, your associates, your family even can succeed. And so there is a maturation of the childlike hero into the adult-like regal aspect, right? King or queen. So we're moving up, and one of the things you might of course, what I'm going to say today is kind of like skimming surface and painting dots on a page. It is not the whole picture, and it might be worth investigating what your archetype tendency is, because since we started out as this divine child with enormous potential and dependency, there's probably a mix of all these things: victim, saboteur, king, queen, hero, trickster, precocious child. They're all in there. We have the potential inside us. Now, one of the things about this child that we are seeing in politics these days is what's called the tyrant. And it's also called the high chair tyrant. And so, those of you who've had children know that sometimes they will be demanding and they'll want their food, and then you start giving it to them and they throw it across the room, right? And this high chair tyrant seems to be an archetype that is predominant in much of our politics, because everybody wants it their way, right? And they're demanding, and and it's everybody else's problem. And if you listen to talk radio, it's a very interesting thing that we have a bunch of victims over here who are also tyrants. Are you with me on that? And this dysfunction is beginning to seep into our society, so that we have enemies just because of their political point of view, right? Duh. I mean, 99% of them is the same as us, and then this 1%, we choose to alienate each other. And we choose because we're caught in an archetype of response to those developmental things. And if we continue to listen to people who exaggerate our victimhood and proclaim our tyrants as being right, we will have a situation in which we cannot balance the budget well enough to keep the economy working, right? You can see it. We're, 10 days away from bankruptcy? As a country, 10 days away from bankruptcy, and that activity is what is driving the function right now. Now, where is the adult in the room? We don't see it, right? Collectively, I mean, there's probably one on each side of the spectrum that is trying its best to make it work, but just, you catch my drift. If you're not aware of your tendencies, your archetypal grooves, then you may be doing well in one way and destroying yourself in another, just like those politicians and pundits are. Winning and losing at the same time. So it's incumbent upon us, if we want to be fully free and heroic, even queen or king-like adults, is to recognize where we are and how our patterns are. And you may not get it without actually scratching really hard to figure that out. You may actually have to work at that, because we tend to deny, obfuscate, and hide from the negative side of our personality. Even if we think we're being really honest with ourselves, there's a really good chance we don't see ourselves clearly. And so if you have friends who are willing to tell you, have you ever thought about? Then if you're able to take a little bit of criticism and investigate, you may find that one of the grooves that currently has you is X. It doesn't mean you're stuck there for life, or that you're even a bad person. It means you fell into the groove, and that groove has been guiding you, and because it was so natural feeling, it seemed like the right thing to be doing. Maybe yes, and then maybe no. And maybe it was right in some places and not right in others, right? Perhaps in work you need to be tough and hard, and perhaps at home you need to be gentle with your children, right? So let's look. Let's take this month, or maybe this year, and investigate what are the patterns. And here's a good way to go about it. Who do we know that really pisses us off? Start there and see if that's not one of them. That's so often the case, isn't it? If you don't really like it, it's because you're really hiding it from yourself. You don't want to see it, so it's easy to say, boy, that person really does that. Who would do that? You know, the 3 fingers, 1 finger thing, right? So this is the invitation over the next month, is to really look and see what our patterns are, knowing that we started as infants, as the divine child, and we were both incredibly potentialed and also incredibly dependent. And since we can be almost anything, and we were dependent on others for everything, it made for a very complex growth into being a human being. So know that if you are off on a tangent of where you want to be, it is really natural and likely, and nothing to be ashamed of, but something you can correct if you know you're doing it. So that's the invitation. Over the next month or so, look to see if you can find the grooves in your personality. You may find them easier when you're failing than when you're succeeding. But one thing taken to the extreme is almost always detrimental. So recognize who you are by the grooves you're in, and know that as a divine child, you have the potential to be anything. And let that potential and that baseline of belonging to God, to this world, to each other, give you the freedom to choose where you want to be. Let us pray. Let's take a deep breath. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. We are the divine child, and it may be good at this moment to feel into that presence, that divine child that still lives in you, as you, with unlimited potential. Unlimited potential, and yet we grew up in a world in which we needed everybody else. And sometimes we got it, and sometimes we didn't get it. And so we might have made up a story that said we have to be this way, or it's unsafe. We have to be that way to succeed. We can't trust. We can't love. It's not going to be reciprocated as we need it. Let us remember we're adults. Skills, capacity, and that as we unlock our divine potential, we heal ourselves, we heal the world. Let us do it. Let us be brave and clear and honest. Let us be what we came here to be. And so it is. I hope you got something out of today's service. We intend to bring you things that will help you in your life become more of who you want to be, give you the freedom of forgiveness and the hope of expectancy that your life will unfold in a way that brings you joy, happiness, and is a contribution to the world. If you would like to contribute to this ministry, please go to unitytriangle.org, hit the donate button, and it will lead you into an easy way of doing that. We thank you for your attention and look forward to seeing you again here.